Hello and welcome to this BAFTA Crew by BFI Network distribution live stream. In this session we'll be covering various distribution options available to first-time filmmakers and the opportunities and challenges presented by the rapidly changing distribution landscape. Just to say, we are live streaming. People will be watching live on the link now or watching at home later. We're going to do about 45 minutes of chat and then we'll have time for questions. Or of course, if anything comes to you during the session and you want to just ask a question, just pop your hand up and we'll make it really open and conversational. So I'm delighted to be joined by three brilliant panellists who know all about distribution. Emily Leo, producer of Under the Shadow and Beverly Laughlin. Wahida Niblo, Head of Theatrical Distribution at Vertigo Releasing, and Tom Abel, MD at Peccadillo Pictures. So I think any discussion of distribution, we should start by tackling this sort of big elephant in the room. I feel like every time anyone thinks about distribution, they preface it by saying the rapidly changing landscape of. What does that mean? What is changing at the moment, and what do filmmakers and producers, especially those who are looking to approach making their debut, what do people need to know?
I think the recent change in picture house rules regarding the windows is probably the biggest development in recent years. In that picture house have fallen in line with Cineworld, who are other owners, and now require a 16-week window between theatrical release and then any other kind of exploitation of the film. For us, because we work a lot with first-time filmmakers, we work a lot with very different films, quite unique films, which in many cases have quite a small audience, but they still deserve to be seen. But one of the things that we often do on tours of films, the smaller titles, we can't give them a full theatrical because we know the cinemas won't support a full theatrical release, but we can give them one-off Q&A screenings, which is something that we often do. But unfortunately, we can no longer do that with Picture House, which is a big shame from our perspective anyway. And we can still do it with Curzon, we can still do it with all of the other independent screens, but that really does limit what we can do with certain titles in the UK now.
I think for us, the changing landscape, I mean, it's an evolving landscape as ever, and I think with films you really have to go, who is the audience? Is there an audience for this movie, and how we can get it to the audience? Very often it means that we bypass the theatrical window and then we look at other ways of getting it to the audience. I think with filmmakers that are emerging now or creating any film that they have to think about, do you want your film to be seen? It might not always be on a big cinema screen. You may not always get the full cinema release, but we will do our best to get it in front of an audience, get it seen by people, get your profile, get the film profile, and that's really important to see. That's the kind of, the challenge as we face.
And I think that's probably one of the most important things I anticipate coming out of this session is, of course, as first-time filmmakers and producers, you want your film to be seen by audiences in cinemas, but trying to then think about the value of other routes.
Yeah, we tend to think of stories as, well, we sort of like when we look for material to produce, we tend to think of stories as platform agnostic until you sort of can clearly see the route through. And in a way, I think that's really exciting, because you can tell stories in so many different ways. And you've got, is it Quibble now, the company? The sort of like mobile platform. Yeah. There's so many different routes to market for your stories, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. So I think actually, the idea that the distribution landscape is changing, and people say that theatrical distribution is a real challenge. Actually, that's not something entirely to be afraid of.
I think it is challenging, just because it's always been a challenge, because there's limited resources, or there's always space issues. So cinemas have a very limited number of screens that they can show films on, and they'll always be under pressure to show the big tentpole films. Captain Marvel's going to play in you know, if you have a cinema with 10 screens, that's going to play in 5 of them without a doubt. So if you're coming to them with a small independent movie where you have to grow your audience, where you don't have a ready-made Marvel audience, that you have to work hard to get those audiences in, they're less likely to take a chance on you rather than go to a big movie that they're guaranteed box office. So I think it's just a matter of us as distributors, we always have to persuade them in the quality of the movie and the quality of the storytelling. And I think that's what we always have to believe in. But ultimately, for whatever reason, usually space issues or date issues or other things, that you have to look at other ways to market. And as you say, it's getting your story, you know, getting your movie seen. Might not always be on the big screen, but finding an audience.
And when, specifically, if you're looking at a debut film and you're trying to weigh up whether or not that feels like something you can give a theatrical release to, and whether that it's something you want to take on, what sorts of factors would you be taking into consideration?
The first one is whether I like it.
Is that enough?
It's not always enough, because quite often I like films that I know are not going to make any money whatsoever. And there are some great films that we do actually turn down because we realise this, you know, there just isn't any way to, regardless of how much you might love it, there just isn't going to, an audience isn't going to come for it, or we just know that most cinemas won't play it. You know, you have to weigh these up. But sometimes it can be a very personal thing. I mean, Sauvage, which we just released, that was quite clear when I saw it that there was a strong audience for it. Not just an LGBT audience, but a wider audience. And that, you know, that's been very successful for us.
And what was it about it that made you feel that there was an audience for it?
One thing you have is sort of, there's a degree of sex in it, which is what
Everyone
people talk
loves
about.
to watch sex on screen.
But it was clear that that's what people would talk about with the film. But that's not what the film is actually about. And you know, the deeper meanings of homelessness and mental health were the core subjects of the film. They were really interesting, and that was the strength of it. And that's what made it what it was. You know, we could have done it for just the sex, but that gets a bit boring. It needs to have something more.
And how much does you know, that film feels very authored and like a really strong directorial vision. Absolutely. How much does that come into play when you're thinking specifically around debuts?
Totally. You really have. I mean, also the lead performance. You know, Felix's performance is absolutely incredible. So you have those two key elements, and it is very much an auteur film. It's strong and it has a vision, and it has a great deal to say. And also Camille was very eloquent. We gave him a little Q&A tour, and he was absolutely brilliant at explaining the film. And that also helps, because when you do those Q&As and the audience understands, you know, the director's vision, and they understand this peculiar ending that they don't really like, and then they understand why it's that way, it generates more conversation, and it really, really worked with Sauvage.
And Wahida, how about you when you're thinking about films that you, particularly in the debut space, and whether or not that's something you can take on?
About 3 years ago, we did a film called Diary of a Teenage Girl by a debut director. It was a brilliant movie, by debut director Marielle Heller, who's now gone on to do Can You Ever Forgive Me? She's a phenomenal talent. The thing that we loved about the film, it was such great storytelling, and you can automatically feel that it's brilliant performances, and she managed to have if you like, a little bit cameo performances in it, which kind of elevates the movie. The lead actress, who's British, Belle Powley, she was fantastic, and then you have Alex Skarsgård, who plays the sort of the rogue guy in it. I mean, the storyline, we really debated whether we could take it on, because it's quite a tough storyline. It's about an underage girl who has a relationship with her mother's boyfriend, who's much older. It's Alex Skarsgård. So we really debated whether it was a film that we could do. We did come across a lot of stumbling blocks. For example, the film, I mean, it has a morality, and it does sort of play out. BBFC gave the film an 18 rating just because of the relationship as opposed to the content. So we did go to, we had various meetings with them, and we outraged the fact they wouldn't change it to 15. But I think that affected the box office slightly. But the reason we took it as a debut feature that we could tell that Marielle had a voice, that she was a great storyteller, and it was fantastic performances that she managed to get from big stars and from an unknown actress who are all doing brilliantly. So I think it's all about a combination of things coming together. And the commerciality is having someone like Alex Skarsgård, people know who he is, so therefore it's that one step closer to getting a ticket purchase. So that kind of comes into it as well.
And at what stage are you generally tending to think about picking something up for distribution? Again, obviously, if you're looking at a very established filmmaker with a really strong track record, you'll be potentially getting on board incredibly early, right at sort of early development stage potentially, and coming on board and co-financing. But when you're looking at a director who doesn't have that kind of track record, there's a sort of bit of a dance, isn't there, that goes on. So much of it is that phrase execution dependent. At what stage are you starting to think about coming on board?
For us, it really does depend. And we tend to track filmmakers from a very early stage. So we have our acquisitions people that go to various different festivals or go to various different conferences, and you kind of go to all the film schools and you kind of get to know everyone that's out there and what kind of stories are being told and what's being funded. We work very closely with the BFI, so we know who's coming through the ranks, so we kind of keep an eye on the ground, if you like, to hear what's happening. But it really does depend on the actual project. Certain films that will come on board very much towards the end, like for example, we did Revenge, which was a debut feature by Coralie Fajo, it was absolutely a fantastic movie, but again, it was a really difficult subject. But we loved it. We knew she had a really strong voice. It was fantastic performances. Again, we kind of came on board to champion Coralie, to get her onto, give her a platform in the UK. So that came on board quite late, but other films that we've come on board very early on, so where someone has sent us their short film, sent us a treatment, and sent us the script, so this is what we're going to do. So we'll sort of track it along the way. If it's something that we're interested in, track and see how it goes, and then kind of follow the story through.
And I'd love to come, in a moment we'll come on and talk about Under the Shadow, which you both worked on together, and is a really interesting example of a UK debut. But before we do, let's just talk. So many UK debuts tend to get made on quite a small, you've talked about quite sort of big, exciting debuts. A lot of UK debuts tend to get made at around the sort of 1 million mark. What are the key sort of challenges in the distribution space with films at that sort of level?
I think for a lot of British films, for their first outing, so to speak, where it doesn't necessarily have a strong festival presence to begin with, or it isn't actually with known cast, this can be very difficult when it comes to cinemas, can't it? And your first hurdle is persuading the cinemas to take it. For example, I talk about Weekend, which
Andrew Haig's debut.
Yeah, that's
well.
Well,
so not really.
Well, because with Andrew, it was he wrote to me and he sent. This was way before Weekend. This is before he did this little film called Greek Pete, and he wrote to me and he gave me his festival pedigree, which was really interesting. He said he talked about his short films. He talked about the festivals he'd been in. He talked about the awards that he'd won. He was saying, "This is me, and here's my screener for my feature film." And we get hundreds of submissions all the time. I'm sure we get far more. We were sent far more films than we could possibly watch. But that sort of put it. In those days, it was DVDs, and they put it to the top of the pile. And I watched it, and I could just see the talent there. It was really strong. And we released that film, and it's just a small. We did that tour where I just talked about. We put it in different cinemas around the country, and then we put it out on DVD. And then he brought the treatment for Weekend, and we were in it from that moment, because I, as a filmmaker, it was very clear that he was going to go somewhere. He had the discipline. And I've lost track of what I was saying. Oh yeah, and then presenting him to the cinemas was really, really tough. We did get it. I think we opened it in 9 screens. but it was
Word of mouth success.
yeah,
as well as
it was huge.
People got behind it.
Because I remember at the LFF where we were doing the UK premiere, I was with him and with Tristan, and we were talking about it, and I said, this is the moment I can feel it. It's the gut reaction. This is the moment that everybody here, our lives are about to change with this, and it certainly did. It was such a, and then a lot of the cinemas that had sort of turned it down or given it really bad slots, beefed it up, put it into decent times after that opening weekend, and we opened on more and more screens, and it was for quite a while it was our most successful film. So,
And so I think, you know, getting a festival launch feels really key for those debuts, but you know, both in terms of convincing distributors that that's something that they should take on, and then in turn convincing bookers at cinemas that there's something that they should book in on their screens. Perhaps let's talk about Under the Shadow as a good example. You premiered at Sundance, which was huge. To what extent did having that big, very visible festival slot help you to then secure your various distribution deals?
Oh, I think it was absolutely key. I think that, I mean, we were so excited that they accepted the film, like literally skipping in the street, so happy. We actually sold the film, distributors got hold of the film before the Sundance premiere, so we ended up selling prior to the festival, but based, I think, on word of mouth that had sort of leaked out about the film, which was all very positive. And I think that just really helped kind of, you know, sort of create a lot of energy behind it. People were really excited to see it. And then it delivered on the day and people really responded to it, and, you know, and it was just incredible. And then the reviews were amazing, and it sort of went from there. And I think that definitely helped us.
Yeah,
Certainly.
I mean, on paper, if you think about it, it was Iranian. It was a foreign language horror film set in the war zone about a mother and daughter, about sort of, you know, on paper it doesn't sound very commercial, or you can't really see. You know, on paper you think, where is it going to go? But the execution was fantastic, and I think you produced a brilliant movie, and the performances from everyone was absolutely brilliant. So all the ingredients came together, and I mean, Sundance was key because you have, even though it's not a UK festival, it's an international festival, you have a lot of UK, you know, the cinema bookers go, the press go, and it's sort of, because of the digital age, the positives of it, the word of mouth spreads really quickly. Something on Twitter will be retweeted 100 times before you've even finished a screening. So we were getting, back in the UK, we were hearing about how well the film went down at Sundance before it had even finished, because people were tweeting about it, and you kind of keep track of it. So that's really, you know, it's really helpful, especially for a first-time filmmaker who doesn't have a commercial, for example, doesn't have a known talent, or doesn't have a certain other sort of tangible commerciality to it. But having the festival, it really does help. And then also you get the industry, and then you get the press, and then you get the audiences, because it's a trickle-down effect. And then you kind of get, you put the director in front of people to talk about, and they kind of get the audiences excited about it. So I think it can be a crucial element for a feature, for debut directors, producers.
And when you say you sold prior to the Sundance launch, is that the stage that you guys came on board, or did you come on board?
It was, well, basically, it was a slight kind of thing, because it went to Netflix bought it before,
which we'll come on to, which is really
before it actually premiered. Because they kind of bought the world, and then we came on board, which meant there was a smaller window where we could release the movie, because Netflix had set their date, and it was going to be then, and it was just like, you have to release it before, obviously it's on Netflix. So that kind of didn't give us enough time to sort of build the word of mouth on it. But again, great for you guys to have your first feature brought worldwide by Netflix, which is fantastic.
And I think it's something, again, we'll sort of come on to and sort of talk about the intricacies of that, and how a sort of Netflix deal works, and what the value of that can be. But I think it's really important to that people understand that a film going to Netflix doesn't mean it just exclusively goes to Netflix. That you can have a combination of a theatrical presence as well as as well as an SVOD deal.
Absolutely. So it just depends on each deal that you do, and I think everything's you can't really, every deal is confidential, but there's ways to shape a deal to kind of feed to work what you want to do.
Yeah.
We had how long was it? 3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a 3-month theatrical window.
Okay.
Which usually would much longer window. I mean, now we wouldn't have been able to show picture houses, but at the time we were, and they were hugely supportive. So again, in the present climate, we wouldn't have been able to show picture houses. And now I think one of our biggest cinemas was Picture House Central, and we couldn't have shown it there now because of their, not breaking the window.
And of course, being able to sell a film to Netflix, I don't imagine you did that deal yourself. I imagine you had a sales agent who did that deal on your behalf. Yeah. And of course, once you start to, a very limited amount of the film's profit will come from its UK theatrical release, and so much of it is then dependent on getting international sales. Of course, where a sales agent comes on board. At what stage did you get a sales agent for Under the Shadow?
Quite early on. We started speaking to XYZ about it in Cannes. No, even before then. So before we started shooting, or as we were shooting, they came on board. They loved the script. They kind of really bought into the vision of it from a very early stage, and just showed a lot of support. They were really crucial in helping us get into Sundance, I think. So I think it was a really important move to get a sales agent on early.
And just, do you, when it comes to a theatrical release for Peccadillo and for Vertigo, do you exclusively buy from sales agents, or do you welcome or tolerate approaches from producers directly?
It depends on the project, but mostly we tend to go through a sales agent, just because when it comes to various different layers of, getting a film is never straightforward as here's a film, please play it. There's so many different layers to it, paperwork, rights issues, etc. When you have an expert in the field who can filter all of that, that's always 100% helpful.
It's a very good filter, and also the sales agents also know what you do. Yeah. So they know the films that you distribute, they know the films that you do well with, and they probably also know the films that you would avoid. So they will push towards you the films that are probably more suitable for you. I mean, we do sometimes deal directly with producers. Very often producers, though, don't have a clue. Oh, well, no, but very often producers have no clue as to what the market is. And it's always the best film, and it's always going to make the most money. And then you have to sort of let them down slowly.
I'm sure your films will all be brilliant.
But the thing is that very often the producer just doesn't really know what the market is like and what the returns are likely to be, because you will always think of the best examples, the films that are the most successful, but most of the films aren't like that, unfortunately. So there are some producers that we have started to work regularly with that we, and occasionally, we'll pick up a film that's been sent to us on spec and think this is interesting, and there's someone we'd like to work more with and develop. And sometimes we ask them to cut the film, and come back from the creative side and say, look, the way it is, but there is something here that we see that could be interesting and could work, and could you think of doing this, that, or the other? And some people will engage with that and come on board, and we'll develop it together. Others don't, and we say goodbye.
So having a sales agent is really, really crucial, actually, once you start to think about your sort of international deals and also making money for the film.
I would say as early as possible.
As early as possible. And what sort of, as a producer, what factors do you take into account when thinking about approaching sales agents, and which sales agents you go out to? I mean, of course, sometimes you may be in a position when there's only one that will be interested, and of course, that may be it. But what's the thought process behind?
I think it comes down to several things. It's Sales agents usually have some kind of identity, so like XYZ, they
as
sell
distributors
genre,
do.
As distributors do as well. So they sell incredible genre. Protagonist has an identity. Yeah. It's all you kind of tailor which sales agents you go to depending on the film. And then it's a case of what the numbers are like, and is it realistic, and ultimately, are they the right company to sell your film?
And when you say the numbers, that's the estimates that the sales agents will, the sales estimates, they'll say, we think, based on this script, with this director, with this cast, we think this can make X amount of money in
you have to be realistic
these territories.
well, because if you have a really, if you have a really hot script, they will give you numbers that you think, oh, this is great, but is it realistic? So I think you always have to have someone who's going to be realistic and kind of know the marketplace, because someone might have a really strong genre movie which is going to get made in 3 years' time, but you can see there's other films that will be coming out very similar. So you have to slightly hedge your bets and make sure you don't get too swayed by someone who's giving you the best numbers. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, a sales agent's job is to sell, and they will do a very good job of selling themselves to you.
I also think they need, they don't want to give you totally unrealistic numbers, because their reputation is based on delivering. So there's that balance. They also know that producers want numbers that are really punchy for a reason, and it's all just a balancing thing.
And of course, once you then start to think about a sales agent in international sales, you are starting to think about making a return on your investment, and paying back the people who have financed the film. To what extent, as a producer, does that factor into the distribution decisions that you're making?
Oh, hugely. I think you always want to pay back the people that have invested in your film.
They get money to make
Yeah, completely.
But does that, you may think, this film really deserves to be seen in cinemas, but it can't make its money back in cinemas.
I think that's a delicate. I think that's a really delicate thing, based on also the expectations of the filmmaker, and we were very lucky. I mean, I think we were very lucky that Babak was very realistic. We all felt together that Netflix was the right home, that potentially the Farsi language psychological horror would be much loved by critics, but how well would it do in cinemas? I don't know. I mean, that's something that none of us really know the answer to. But we made that decision together. And I think there are some filmmakers that are like, no, it has to go fully theatrical, and I'll be deeply upset if it doesn't. And then you've got to deal with that. But.
And being as candid as you feel you are able to be, what are the relative sort of advantages and disadvantages of a Netflix deal?
Well, you make your money back, hopefully. Your film gets seen on TV.
Probably by a lot more people than it would do in the cinema.
I think that you need to work. If you work very closely with them, you can also make sure that it's positioned, that it's marketed. I think producers are starting to learn how to do that a little bit better as well. The upside is that that you make your money back immediately, rather than having to play the long game. And I think it's a decision. It's a decision of risk ultimately, and you're making that decision based on either you're a kind of crazy producer who thinks that your film is going to sort of just kill it in the box office, or not. And you just make that call on a case-by-case basis.
And is there anything you would have done differently with Under the Shadow, that being your first?
Tons, but but not really. I don't know. You learn so much, as you go through, and I think we did a lot of stuff right, and I think we learned an awful lot along the way as well. But I think the key thing is just finding the right partners early on, people that really believe in your film, people that have access to the right people. I think knowing the importance of a festival launch is really key. It's interesting, actually, marketing materials-wise. The poster that we did for Under the Shadow, we actually did whilst we were shooting and got somebody to draw that up whilst we were shooting. So we were already thinking about that whilst we were shooting, and then it ended up being like
the poster.
the poster.
And is that something that XYZ were across and were doing for you, or that's
It came
something you
from-
entirely
it came
did?
from- It came from you guys. I mean,
from-
usually with, I've worked with so many first-time directors, and what you do get, the materials, because everyone's so concentrated on making the movie, the materials just, you don't have any stills that are usable. You don't have any production notes, and you don't have, you could have a fantastic actor who's only, who does a cameo for 2 days, and you have no, you have no notes on them whatsoever, no good stills, etc. But thinking about, you're making a movie not just for yourself, you're making it for an audience. How will that audience see it? What do you need for them to see it? It always comes with a visual aid. So the poster, knowing, it was very key that you had that great image that you did the shoots with the actors during the filming. So we had those shots and we had all the backgrounds, so you could put it together. And that kind of makes it much easier when it comes to distributing a film, that if you do have, all the elements that fall into place, it makes it easier. I mean, there are people who shoot certain extra scenes knowing they're good trailer moments. And that's, again, if you have the time, do it, because that all helps. So yeah, it's just kind of always thinking, or having this kind of a slight forethought, thinking, okay, this is a great movie, but also how am I going to market it?
And then thinking, so we've sort of talked quite comprehensively about sort of theatrical and SVOD. And what other avenues are open to filmmakers to get their films in front of audiences? I mean, I know Vertigo, when you were first starting out, you were doing a lot of self-distribution. Is that still a viable option for filmmakers and producers?
I think it just depends on the avenue that you want to go down. I mean, I'm showing my age now, but years ago we did a marketing collaboration with MySpace where we found... I'm showing my age, literally. Yep, don't ask me how old I am. So the whole idea was that we would find how they had found musicians. We would find a filmmaker through My Movies, it was called, and what we wanted to do is find a great new voice and get the MySpace community to come up with a storyline that could go in there, and even had sort of competitions for extras, and there were various different elements of the campaign where we really had involvement. And the ultimate aim of, we found a great director called Vito Rocco, who's now doing great TV, he's on films and TVs, etc. But the whole idea of the MySpace movie was that it would then go back to the MySpace community for free, so they would get to see it for free. We worked with Film 4 on that as well, and the BFI, so it was a big sort of experimental collaboration, and it was hugely successful in getting, showing people that if you wanted to make a movie, there are other ways of making a movie. So that worked really well for us back then. Vertigo started out with trying to make movies and trying to get them to an audience without having to go through the studio system or getting stuck, having to look for a distributor. That's why we set up the distribution as well as the production. And through that, we've worked with so many first-time directors that have come through the slate. I mean, Gareth Edwards, the most famous out of the whole slate. But, it's just about anyone that has a great voice, wants to tell a story, has a passion for it. There's always going to be a need to tell your story, and then the avenue that your audience are going to see it might not always be a big screen in Leicester Square, might be on a little, device that they see it on a streaming service. That's still viable. You're still getting your film seen by an audience.
I hope everyone on the live stream can hear us. There seems to be a helicopter landing on the roof of BAFTA. And to what extent once you then start to think about your second feature, to what extent does the distribution strategy that you have chosen for your debut affect, either as distributors, your inclination to pick up a second feature, or as a producer, your ability to get a second feature financed? To what extent are people looking to say, oh, actually, that debut didn't have a very good theatrical release, it didn't make much money?
I think it's more about, I mean, for us, it's more about if it's a debut feature, if someone's done a fantastic debut, it's not so much about how much money it's made, it's much more about how well it's been received and what the talent is there. Yeah. Critically, also with audiences, because now everyone's a critic, so you can just literally go onto Twitter, hashtag, and see what people are talking about and see what the actual audiences say. You can go into Metacritic and see sort of other ways, and also critically as well, just to see what kind of, what critics are saying. So it's not just about, I mean, for us, when we look at someone who's already made a feature, it's not just about how much money did it make over $1 million or not. It's also, there's a sort of a body of work that you can look at. And it could have played at festivals, and you see how many festivals it played at and what the reaction was at from there. So.
And also, I think if you have made a feature that's been really well received, as a director, you end up on lists, at various financiers, studios, whatever, and that completely enables you to get a second feature made, either by yourself or with your producer or whatever. And like that's ultimately it, right? Like if your film is well received, that's where you end up. And it's not so much about how much money it's made.
And to what, before I open it out to our audience, to what extent do filmmakers and producers need to be thinking about their audience right from the get-go? Obviously, you want to be thinking about, the brilliance of your story and your creative vision. To what extent should people be thinking about where something sits in the market?
If you're just making it for your mum, that's fine, and make it for her and let her see it. But if you want to bring it to an audience, then you've really got to think about what is working in the marketplace, the kind of films that are getting into cinemas, if you want to be in cinemas, the sort of films that the distribution companies distribute or the sales agents pick up and sell. It's vitally important that you, as a producer, know what your end goal is. What is it at the end of this whole process do you want? And I think that's the most important question.
I think sometimes as well it's a little bit counterintuitive to look at what everybody else is doing, because I feel like audiences respond to, basically it's like if the world's really depressing, your instinct is to go to the cinema to watch something that's uplifting. Right, and ultimately, and oftentimes, the films that are in the cinemas aren't that uplifting because they were made 2 years ago or whatever. And I think as a producer, if you can just keep trying to tap into what you want to go and see at the cinemas, assuming that you're not, constantly just going to watch really small art house films, but you're aware of the entire landscape, that can really help navigate, because you should be thinking about audiences all the time, whether it's theatrical or mobile or streaming services. You're not making it for just your mum, because you're not going to get financed if you're making a film just for your mum. But I also I think it's not, there's no exact science to it. Nobody really knows the rules ever. So I think sometimes counterintuitiveness actually does work.
Yeah, I mean,
to be true to yourself.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. Be aware of what's going on, but also be true to yourself and what the vision for the film is.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine if you were thinking incredibly cynically only about an audience and getting your film distributed, there may be a version of Under the Shadow where you go, you know what, actually, let's just make it in English.
Yeah, I think
well, no, exactly.
Then it wouldn't have been authentic. I think what you have to do with your first feature, I think that's the most unique opportunity that you have in your whole entire career, is your first feature, because you can really put yourself into it. I mean, you always think about, you do want it seen by an audience, you want the performance to be fantastic, you want it to be edited brilliantly, you want it to look fantastic, you want all of the elements. But ultimately, you need an element of yourself in there. It's got to be a story that you are desperate to tell, that you want to tell. I think that passion comes across the screen.
Yeah.
Because you can always tell people that are just doing it because they want the glamour. But it's the people that have the real passion.
Yeah.
That's sort of always
Yeah, I think it's the difference between like a voice of an auteur versus films that is like created cynically by design. And most of the time those movies fail, I think, because audiences can smell it a mile off.
Yeah.
And you know, you can see it with like the sort of like second-rate rom-coms or comedies that are like high concept but just not as good as the really good stuff. You know, and those you feel like they've been created for audiences, but they just don't have the voice. And
I think that's your first feature, is where you really can put your own stamp on it, because very much you won't have the expectation, you won't have huge budgets, and not having huge budgets doesn't need to be a negative. It can be a positive, that you're free to be able to put your own voice on it. Whereas once you get lots of finances involved, then lots of people to answer to.
Yes, lots of cooks.
Yeah.
So can I just open it out to the audience? Does anyone have anything that they'd like to? Yes, just here.
Hiya. I'm just wondering, how much do you, with crowdfunding, is that a good thing to do first of all early on? You know, having made an effort to get some money, then other people are more inclined to give you money to see that you're serious about it. How much do you give away with? Because you give away rewards and gifts or whatever. How much would you give away, and would that limit you going forward?
So just for the live stream, I don't know if people could hear the question. It's about crowdfunding and how much you give away.
We're actually working with an American filmmaker who, Jim Cummings, he did, his first film, which we're releasing in the UK very soon, was 100% crowdfunded. So
this is Thunder Road.
Thunder Road, yeah. So he did a short film, which he again did had a crowdfunding, smaller budget, did the short film, and then put it on the platform and said, look, I want to make this into a feature. Who's in? And then there were lots of little rewards that were given out. I'm not sure if there was any back-end deals. I think it was mostly, come on set, see things first, see trailers, etc. So he kind of gave those types of things away. And then he had the money to make the feature Thunder Road. And then in the US, they self-distributed, where they went to various different cinemas. He did Q&As, he kind of built up the audience, and then they put it to the streaming services. And we bought it for the UK. Again, it's a fantastic movie, and his story is brilliant, that they've managed to sort of almost come against the system, go against the grain in America to be able to do that. So I'm not sure exactly how much he gave away, but I think it was much more marketing than anything else. So there are still success stories within the crowdfunding.
It seems as though it's got sort of, not that he sacrificed the short, but the short was there to facilitate the crowdfunding side of things more, and then the feature kind of was purer in a way. Was that the case?
I think the short stood on its...
Yeah,
I mean, that's what the impression I got, was the short was complete in its own right, and then they did the feature.
I mean, he wanted to... Yeah, so the short was a film that the short that he wanted to make all alone. I think he had the idea for a feature, but that was something that came on afterwards, because this short was so well received. He's actually coming to the UK for a Q&A, so you can ask him yourself. Well, that's the way, and it was a fantastic short. So I think a lot of people were saying, look, I think this should go into it. And he had the idea, and that sort of gave him the step to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, just at the back here.
So I have a question related to about my debut film, which was made in completely no budget and is now in post-production. And only now, quite late, we're thinking about contacting some sales agents, which I guess it's a bit late, but better now than later. So I was wondering, what would you say is the best first approach in such circumstances? Especially, being quite small filmmakers with no particular contacts, and the film has no big cast or anything like this.
So the question is about for a low-budget debut that's in post-production, what's the best strategy for approaching sales agents?
Shall I take it as a producer? How close to finishing the film are you?
Only some post-production.
It's in post-production. And have you submitted to any festivals? Is it complete or not yet?
But we could submit a work in progress already.
Well, maybe this is a...
Yeah. Oh, no, I mean,
I was going to say maybe this is a question actually I can field because
Yeah.
I do acquisitions consulting for a sales company as well. I'd say just, as Emily was saying earlier, every sales company will have their own identity. So think about your film. Think about perhaps what the comps are, what the films are that you feel like your film is most similar to. Have a look at which sales companies sold those films, and then be quite strategic about the companies that you approach. It's fairly easy to find people's contact details, and just email them and ask them if you can send them the film.
Okay. And do you think like sending out a trailer or teaser, something like that, in the first email, or just a simple approach?
You could absolutely send them a teaser in the first email, and then ask them, could I please send you the finished film?
Thank you.
Yes, a question here.
A bit of a follow-on. I found it really interesting that you said that you had a sales agent, or a sales agent got you into Sundance, or
Well, the film got you into Sundance.
No. They just they were helpful. They didn't get us into Sundance. They were helpful in I don't know. They have good relationships with the guys over there. So it's useful in just when you present your film to festivals.
so would you suggest having a sales agent before you approach any festival in order to open up contacts or access?
I would say it's very helpful having a sales agent because they will help you devise a festival strategy, because every festival is not right for every film, and depending on the kind of film and the sort of theatrical life you want, the kind of distribution strategy you want, a sales agent will help you to figure out whether South by Southwest is the right place, or whether Sundance is the right place, or maybe Locarno is the right place, which as a producer that can sometimes be quite difficult to know. It's not entirely your job to know that. So a sales agent can be incredibly helpful in helping you figure out that strategy. And as Emily says, they will have those good relationships with the festivals, and we'll be able to sort of nudge your film in the right direction. But ultimately, festivals only select on the strength of a film. A sales agent, if your film is no good, the film is no good. But at the same, in the same time, if the film is brilliant and you don't have a sales agent, it will find its way to Sundance.
Exactly.
And quite often films will play in Sundance without a sales agent, and will get picked up as soon as the lineup is announced. All the sales agents will be going, right, what films are available, and we'll pick them up. So I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yes, question just here.
Follow up to what you're just discussing. So it's better to get a sales agent, or wait till you've got it in the festival?
I
think it's so useful, because they'll talk to you about the market. They'll talk to you about which festival your film could possibly play at. They're very savvy about essentially which distributors might also buy your film. So having those conversations with them early on in the process are always incredibly useful.
Like you said, that if you get into Sundance, then the best sales agent could be there. Options of the best ones.
I mean, years ago, we just on UK festivals, we go to quite a lot to the Edinburgh Film Festival and to London Film Festival, and we know the team at the festival really, really well. So they will tell us if there's a really good film without any distributors or without, they will go, this is a filmmaker that's come, it's a fantastic movie. They can help facilitate that as well, because, if a film's really good, they will help push that as well. So I think it's just a matter of, I don't think there's a right answer to which way to do it, but it just kind of, and the festivals themselves, the ones we've, they can be hugely useful as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's I'd say probably the earlier you can get a sales agent on board, the better.
Scary thing, because with what should I go to find one? Because it's only on a script, and that's your debut feature.
I think.
What do you take to a sales? Because they say yes, send it, and then you just. what else would you send to sort of get them on your side?
Well, I think often you will find with a sales agent, particularly with a debut, they would probably say, I mean, we didn't
get XYZ on Under the Shadow until we were in production.
Okay.
And and we had financing as well. Like I used to work at a sales company years ago, and I remember there was a big difference between films that were completely speculative versus films that were financed and ready to go. And if they're financed and they're happening, then I think that a sales agent is likely to take them more seriously because they know that it's there and they've got something tangible to look at and see.
Absolutely, unless you have a very established director, and sort of potentially exciting cast, in which case a sales agent may come on board and offer an MG to help you finish financing. But if you're a debut that's and it's sort of untested territory, they will tell you what stage to approach. You can always be in touch and say, I've got this script. Are you happy to look at it? And they may well say, actually, no, we need to wait until there's footage for us to see. So that can always be a dialogue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, question here, then one here, then one here. Start here.
Hi, how much of a risk is it for the filmmaker or producer to submit their content out to a sales agent or to a distributor?
As in terms of sort of IP or piracy or any...
More like, would you lean on the sales agents to provide the funding if you don't have much funding yourself? In terms of selling distribution.
So if your film isn't yet entirely financed...
Yes, so say someone here, you've got your product, you've got your content, you want to sell it, but then your first time director, how do you lean on the sales agent trusting you?
I think if you send a sales agent a script that they go completely crazy over and they throw themselves behind, they can be very active in helping you find finance. I think the challenge that many first-time filmmakers have is that it is very, very difficult to get people to back that, which is why, when we funded Under the Shadow, that came from private money. You've got, in the UK, you've got the BFI features scheme, you've got various places that you can go to try and get support. Sales agents tend to go to industry financiers who I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think are harder to get to finance than iFeatures that are actually designed to be financing first features. So as a new filmmaker in the UK, I'd say your best bet is to really use the incredible institutions that you have here and try and get support through that, or find a producer who is just really savvy at getting people to invest. Yeah.
And then once you have a finished film that has been financed in the right sort of way, a sales agent, the cold hard truth of the matter is a sales agent will only take a film on if they feel there is commercial value in it, if they feel they can sell it. There are circumstances in which they may take something on because it looks sexy on the slate, or it's something it's company they want to keep, but mostly it does come down to quite sort of bold commercial decisions. So I think there was a question over here.
I just recently won a Challenge Alexa competition and made a first feature with that sort of top high-end equipment.
Brilliant.
And just nearly finished it, and the script attracted a really good sort of quite well-known Scottish comedy cast. It's a comedy, quite well-known stand-up and comedy actors, and it's shot on beautiful equipment, obviously beautiful camera. So I'm in a position where I've nearly finished it, and just interested to know what, in your position, I do now next, because I'd like to sort of have a strategy. Where do I go with it? I hope it's got a screening in the West End in May. Do I invite people to see it? Then do I put it into festivals? What's the strategy? Where do I go from now?
Do you have a sales agent? You don't have a sales agent?
No, I've just completed it. It was all very fast. made it. It's a fantastic LF camera that nobody can get hold of. And it looks beautiful. I think it's funny. The cast were all laughing hysterically as we filmed it. So hopefully it's good. And so when it's been shown, you know, where do I go from there?
What would you do, Emily?
I would probably set up a screening and invite sales agents over. Do you have an agent?
No, I'm a producer.
Oh, you're a producer. Okay, sorry.
They're all going to Cannes.
Sorry?
Do you have to time it the right time so that the sales agents are available?
They only go to Cannes for 2 weeks, if that. Like,
It's
yeah.
2 weeks before they're
Oh yeah,
busy
yeah,
and
yeah,
that,
yeah.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
What's the best time if you're having a screening?
Well, I've got a screening
have to
in
think
May
about
here in the West End, at View Cinema in the West End. So it's a nice big screening that Directors UK have organised and Ari Alexa. So do I invite people and where do you get to invite?
I think you should invite.
Make money back on a short, or is that your calling card that you take to festivals and try and?
Is it a short or is it a feature?
It's a short.
Oh, it's a short.
It's a short landscape. I wanted to know.
Festivals?
Yeah, festivals.
Straight into a festival.
Yeah.
To 100 festivals?
Yeah, yeah.
That's what you did.
Yeah.
No, you need about 100
But you're-
and then you get 10 of them.
Yeah.
But you're right though. You're right
Not
though
for
about
shorts.
catching them at the right time.
Yeah.
If they're going to you, then they're Venice, then they're here. So if you don't time it, they're like, sorry, we're busy or we're off.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's really
Early summer's quite good.
Yes, yeah.
And then sometimes during the summer when like people are on holiday but not on holiday.
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Good
Yeah.
Winter usually.
Winter's quite good.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
But
But
not
what-
between Sundance and Berlin.
Okay.
But what I would say, if you had been talking about a feature, I would have said yes, or organise a small private screening exclusively for sales agents. So probably before the one that you do in the West End. So hire one of these small private screening rooms in Soho, contact all the sales agents and invite them to come and
Tell them there'll be
see it
food and
there.
drinks.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I said food and drinks.
Yeah.
Good ways of enticing them even to a screening of unknown,
I mean, if you-
entice them with the poster and the
I mean, you said you had known talent in it, like comedy talent, and could they come? Yeah, and so if that was a feature, could they come and do an intro? You know, something like that, because that's another enticement. So you can do that, and if, for example, if you did get it into a festival beforehand, you could get a quote from the festival and put that on your email to say, you know, this is what other people think. So just show that there's caliber there, there's audiences there. The other thing you could do, and you should do if you have a feature and you're doing a screening for sales agents, don't have it. I mean, you might disagree, but don't have it cold. So they're not just coming in watching the movie.
As in cold in the room.
Yeah, don't make the room cold. But if it's a comedy, you know, you want to have other people in there. Do tell them there'll be other people in there who are going to create the atmosphere. I mean, it works for every screening. Where if you just have 3 people in a 40-seater screening about to watch a comedy, and they're like, who's going to? Is that creates the atmosphere?
Yeah.
So I think create an atmosphere as well.
So you need to paper the seats basically to make sure that it's filmed.
It's slightly beyond the remit of this panel. I mean, I
think you can. Shorts International. I think there are instances of people actually making money back from shorts, but I wouldn't expect it.
Think of it as a calling card.
Yeah.
But also get it in front of the British Council, because they have a department there to support shorts.
Yes, my colleague Jo Duncombe is the person to speak to at the British Council. There was a question here.
Yes, great panel. I loved Under the Shadow and Daria Fatinska, and I watched everything like that. I'm an LGBT, so your target, and future collaborate.
Well done.
We've emailed actually.
I'm sorry?
We've emailed. I'll tell you later. I'm working on my debut feature, which is an LGBT drama set in Madrid, in Spain, where I'm from, and I'm working with a production company from there. So my question is on international co-production. I have a few HODs attached already that are from the UK, because I myself I'm based here. So yeah, how do you Is
I mean,
there any kind of like
Again, it's slightly
ideas?
beyond the remit of this
Also
panel,
depends on
but
Brexit.
Yes, it
and
really
Brexit,
depends
who
on-
knows?
It does depend on Brexit.
Yeah.
all right?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on which way also you're wanting. Are you wanting to qualify for British tax credit or?
I suppose it would be Spanish. Yeah.
Oh, then I don't know. Sorry.
So, yeah, because I was more interested in you, Emily, because of Under the Shadow.
hmm
Does it qualify as a British film? Or
It did. Yeah, it did. Well, the director, the writer-director
It's British.
is British. British production company.
It's British financing.
British financing.
Mhm.
It was British.
Two of the
Yeah.
stars were.
One of the stars was British.
Yeah. We shot some of it in.
And we posted in the
Yeah.
UK. We shot in Jordan. Yeah.
And before we wrap up, any last questions anyone wants to squeeze? It's good.
The question before, so better to organize a screening and invite sales agents, or just maybe send them an email with a private screening of the film?
You know, I think if you can persuade them to come to a screening, that is the ideal. But if you don't have cast, and if it's you may end up having to send a link, and that's also fine.
But also, this is where festival platforms are incredibly useful, because the chances of a sales agent taking a film seriously prior to, just like an email coming through with a link versus a film that has been talked about at festivals, that's a massive difference. And I think, sales agents get a lot of material all the time, and it's just, festivals help raise your profile. And that makes all the difference in the world, I think.
Absolutely.
I just wondered, I know that there's a lot of conversation about festivals, and I just wondered if you could say a little bit about the selector screenings for this group, because potentially that's the next step.
Yeah. So I suppose the thing that I do at the British Council in my day job is I am responsible for getting all of the UK films into festivals. I mean, of course, that's work that sales agents do, but I run international festival selector screenings in London. So I host Sundance and Berlin and Rotterdam and Toronto and Venice, and all of the key festivals come to London for a few days every year to watch new UK films, and obviously big films like a new Ken Loach film or a new Mike Leigh film doesn't need my help to get that into festivals or to get that onto programmers' radars. But the films that don't yet have sales agents, that don't yet have distribution, that aren't made by talent that programmers will already be familiar with, can really benefit from the screenings that we run. So as soon as you are in post and you're starting to think about your festival strategy, do make sure that you have a look on the British Council website at our selector screening information, and my contact information is all up there. And drop me a line and just make sure you get on our mailing list, so that I can start screening it to festivals. And it'll often be at that sort of stage that you would then start having the conversations with sales agents at the same time. And you say, look, we're screening for Sundance, we're screening for Berlin, we're screening for Rotterdam. Are you interested in having a look? And at that point, the point the sales agents will go, oh, okay, this is a real thing. Let's have a look at this. Thank you, Cass. All right, thank you so much for coming. Thank you everyone for watching at home. I hope you found that helpful, and thank you so much to my brilliant panellists, Tom, Wahida and Emily. Thanks for your time.